presentation that we're about to do is follow the data. So I think anyone who knows me through supervision or listens to the podcast, this will know that, along with a couple of others, that this is one of my favourite sayings because it's so crucial and we collect data. So the least that we can do is actually listen to it. So before we fully get started, my fellow panelist member here, Sam, she's going to be manning the Q&A section. So if you have any questions as we're going along, please just type them in there. She might answer some as we go along, and at the end, any that she feels it would be good to sort of like discuss as a whole group, we will then do at the end. Okay, so there we go. So hopefully a few of you in this room are going to be collecting CEUs, and this will be the same for all of the talks throughout the day for people who are collecting CEUs. So each talk will have embedded in it a couple of keywords. Make a note of those, and then after the conference you can visit the Wise Bytes website and purchase your CEUs on there, and will be issued a certificate. And those CEUs are fine for either your BCBA registration for anyone who's BCBA, but also for your UK SBA membership. So that will be the process for those. Okay, so before we launch into it, I thought it'd just be good to sort of like go through the content of the presentation and how I wanted to sort of structure it. So firstly, I just wanted to look at some of the data collection sins, which I know myself have definitely committed these sins at one time or another in my behaviour career, and I'm sure hopefully not quite so much, but some of them I might very well commit again. And then the 4 steps here is that we plan out what data we want to collect, we collect it, we analyse it, and then we use that to make decisions. And that planning stage is so important because we don't want to just collect loads of data like willy-nilly, because then we've got tons of stuff to wade through. So we need to make sure that we're aware of what do we actually want to get and then get it. So firstly, these data collection sins that we want to try and avoid from happening. So the first one is implementing systems that we did not need. Like, it can end up being really, really tempting to just go like, oh, I might need this at some point. I'm going to collect data on engagement. Oh, I might need at some point some data on sleeping. Right, I'm going to collect that. Obviously, the more systems that we implement, the more work that we actually give to our staff teams. And as we all know, people, staff teams and services are incredibly busy people. We don't need to give them more paperwork than is absolutely needed. So that's the first one to avoid. The next one is we make it far too complicated. So we have these very elaborate ideas of data that we want to collect, and it means that it's almost impossible for staff members to fill it incorrectly. And if it's not filled incorrectly, then our data ends up being sort of unusable. So we want to always make sure that we make it as straightforward as possible. Next one, we put the data system in for far too long. So as I've just said, staff members are incredibly busy, and we sometimes put something in place and forget to tell them to take it back out again. So who's turned up to services and they've been filling out ABC forms since the year dot, they file them, put them in a cupboard, never to be used again. And that's quite often because we've sort of put that in place when they've got incident forms in place as well, and then not told them, okay, great, I've got the data that I need, you may stop using them now. And then the last one is, who's collected data that data is actually gathered elsewhere? Yeah, I've done that one too. So if the data is gathered elsewhere, we should be trying not to replicate it. One of the classic ones that I see is like sleep recording. We quite often see that staff members are doing that in the daily notes, what time someone went to bed, what time they got up, if they got up in the middle of the night, how long they were up for. We don't need to put in a sleep monitoring chart as well. We can use that data even if we tweak it a little bit. So how do we avoid those sins? Plan what we need and why we need it. Be very clear on what we're looking for. Make sure we have that straight in our head before we even implement a system. Have a little look at doing an audit. So what data are our staff teams already using? And if we can we use that data? And like I just said, like even if we tweak it a little bit, so the sleep monitoring, if that's in the daily notes, sometimes I'll just put like a table in there and just ask people to tick it. There's no point giving them another form that might get lost. We add it to the systems that are already in place. Make things super easy. So the quicker and easier a form is to fill in, the more likely we are to get it to fill in. So I know Sam uses these quite a bit as well. Quite a fan of a checklist ABC. Sometimes we see in services like they have a table which just is topped up with antecedent, behaviour, consequence, and staff, they're asked to write a lot and they don't necessarily know what to write. So then the data is not particularly useful. Whereas if we have a checklist, super easy to fill in, but also it's super easy to analyse. We can begin to pull it together. Within super easy as well, I always think about reducing what we would call response effort. So keep a pen with the incident forms is actually like a really easy strategy. If staff have to find the form, find a pen, each of those steps make it less likely that the incident forms will be completed. Train staff or give them some sort of clear instructions for how to fill it in. Just because we think it's straightforward doesn't necessarily mean that it is straightforward for staff teams to put in place. So just going through that can be really, really easy, or write a sort of crib sheet of how to do it and keep that where the forms are kept. Again, you don't want to send them on a goose chase looking for instructions for how to fill in forms. Put it in for a time limited period. So sometimes I'll say to staff teams like, okay, Grant, I'm going to need some ABC data. Like your incident forms are really useful to let me know time and whether you used a physical intervention or not, but I can't get that clear pattern of what happened before the behaviour, what the behaviour was, and what happened after the behaviour. So let's put in some ABC forms. What I'm going to ask you to do is put them in for 2 weeks. We'll review it. We'll see whether we've got enough. And then we'll either take them out for a little bit and use that. Or if we've not quite got enough, we might leave them in for a bit longer. And then the last bit is review whether the data collection systems are actually working. Really important, you don't want to keep plodding on with something that's not actually giving the data that you need. And you definitely don't want to get to the end of your sort of assessment and go, oh, that's not useful. So make sure that you review that really regularly. Okay, so once we've tried to not go down the behaviour analyst sin route, first step is let's plan what data we actually need to collect. So we collect all sorts of data. We collect information on incidents, on quality of life, social validity, and then obviously to inform functional assessments. I'm going to concentrate, because it's only a 40-minute presentation, on incidents, because that's something that's a bit more universal throughout here, whereas anyone who just went to Paddy, Hannah and Tia's first talk, quality of life, you need a tool that's very specific for that individual. So it's quite difficult for me to cover that in a 40-minute session. Social validity, absolutely crucial and quite often gets missed. So this is where you ask, was it the right intervention? Did we target the right behaviour? And did it make enough of a difference? So crucial information, and there's tons of really lovely stuff on social validity. And then the last bit there is function assessment. And again, there we have like a whole toolbox of stuff, and we pull out the ones that are sort of relevant for the situation that we're in, but it's kind of massive. So 40 minutes is not quite enough there. And on the practical PBS course, that's something that they look at in that training that PBS UK is delivering. So if we're thinking about incidents, what sort of dimension is really important for us to get? So some of the time we need to just understand patterns of the time that the incidents are occurring. So are they more likely in the morning, during lunchtime, the afternoon, just before bed? Or are they more likely on a Tuesday? And what can be really useful for that is a scatter plot. So that's where you have down the side your times and across the top your days. And then you just ask staff to like make a little X if the behaviour occurred during that time. Really quick and easy, but you can pull out really nicely the patterns of the behaviour from that. If you need the information on what happened before, during and after an incident, then we go for ABC forms. But that's not the only data that can be really useful. So sleep logs can be quite important there. If someone's behaviour is more likely when they're tired, it might be useful to have a look at sleep logs. If someone has seizures, it can sometimes be really useful to look at that log, just so that you can begin to see it. So there's no need to necessarily go straight down the ABC route. We can look at other tools. If duration is the issue, sometimes what I do is I will give staff a stop clock. So typically for people who maybe present at like freezing behaviour, so it takes a long time to get off the bus, what I might ask staff to do is, as soon as you ask that person to get off a bus, start the timer and then stop it when they finally get off the bus, so that we can have an idea of, well, how long did that go on for? It can be, again, a nice, quick and easy thing. They're writing down one number. And then another dimension that we have a look at is like impact. So what was the effect of the behaviour? And here it can be really useful to think about recording the outcomes. So sometimes I photograph them. Body maps can be a really useful tool to sort of consider recording outcomes. So injury level. One that I was thinking of here is a gentleman who, one of the sort of concerns was that he wasn't eating enough. So rather than getting staff to weigh food and all of that stuff, I asked them to take a photograph before the food was given to him and a photograph after he was given the food, along with how long he had the food for. And it just gave me really concrete data of how much is he actually eating. So first keyword for people who are collecting CEUs is objective. Okay, so we go on to step 2 now, which is our collecting the data. So we want to sort of make sure, firstly, that we avoid those sins. So make sure that we reduce response effort here. Make it super easy, make the forms accessible. You don't want people to have to go into the office and root through several files to find them. You don't want people to have to keep printing off forms. So make sure that the response effort is really, really little. Keep a pen with the forms. And those tick charts and things that I discussed before can be really helpful there to reduce response effort. Explain why the forms are needed. It's amazing how many times we give staff forms and don't really explain why they're needed. But it can be really useful to begin to understand why something's needed. We see that that means that they're more likely to be filled in. Discussed time bound already. And then show that the data is actually being used. That can reinforce staff. If they just keep filling in forms but have no idea that they're being used, you can begin to see that people are less likely to fill in data. And probably one of the biggest things is, if you have a staff member who's filling in forms, don't automatically assume that they are the only one that is having behaviours presented to them. You know, what ends up then, if we're sort of going, what are you doing wrong because you keep getting loads of incidents, is we're actually punishing them filling in forms. So we need to make sure that we actually go, oh, do you know what? Thank you so much for filling in the form. That's been really useful. I've got a lot of information from that. So step 3 is analyse the data. So we need to make sure that we do this like sensibly. And again, anyone that knows me knows that I'm quite a fan of Excel, but so that's why I end up having that little picture there. So just have a little think here of if I presented my data to say pre-intervention, the mean, so the average number of incidents per day was 15, and I put my intervention in place, and then after that, the average number of incidents was 5. We'd probably go like, oh my word, wow, you have reduced the incident level by 66%. You've got a third of what was happening previously. If I graph some data, and I show here, we've got the first section is like baseline, that's before the intervention went in place, dashed line intervention, and then we've got the data post-intervention. There, we'd probably go like, well, actually, has the intervention made a difference? The behaviour was coming down anyway. My intervention probably wasn't needed. I've put a lot of work into something that, you know, behaviour was probably reducing anyway. Would have made sense to get more information. But guess what? Those two are actually the exact same data. So the mean the average can actually be unrepresentative of information. It can skew our perception quite a lot. So we want to go with graphs. We want to go with that visual analysis. So it's really useful to have a think about graphing our data. And then we look at these three things. So we look at the trend, the level, and the stability of the data. So in our first one, down at the bottom left-hand corner, labeled trend, you've got the purple line is a decreasing trend and the green line is an increasing trend. If we've got an increasing trend in behaviours that challenge, probably a pretty good idea to implement an intervention. If we've got a decreasing trend, okay, we probably don't need to worry about it so much. If you have got a level trend, that's also probably a good time to begin to think about implementing an intervention. So consider trend. Next thing is like how variable the data is. So our top right-hand corner. So you can see there that our purple line is really variable, whereas our green line is much more stable. It's not to say in real life settings you can't implement an intervention when it's variable. You know, it's sometimes not safe to do so. If you've got someone presenting really significant self-injurious behaviour, you know, if it's variable, that's fine. It's much easier to see an effect if it's stable, but I'm not saying hold off on things. And then the next one down is level. So have we got a low level of behaviour, the green line, or have we got a high level presentation of behaviour? And again, here it's not to say like don't intervene when it's low level if you've got really significant behaviours. Like I work with a chap who was jumping out of cars. You know, doing that just once a month is really dangerous, so we still need to intervene. But again, if we implement an intervention when it's high, then we're much more likely to be able to say, hey, fabulous, it's an intervention that has made the difference. So just a little bit on Excel. You know, if people want information on Excel, again, you know, and I've bored Sam with Excel quite a lot, but if people wanted more information around how to use Excel to analyse data, there's quite a lot of information in journals and stuff that I can point you in the right direction of. I've put my email address at the end of the presentation. So yeah, please do feel free. I'm very passionate about using Excel, as geeky as that is, because it's so useful. But just one little tip. If you want to look at baseline via post-intervention, you can step your data. And what that will present is a break in the line. So you can see here that we've got the little line is our baseline, and then the decreasing line is our post-intervention. And then we can just insert our little dash line there to actually go, okay, that's where the intervention went in place. Really nice and simple, quick, easy win on Excel to get a really lovely graph. Okay, so just some things to remember when you're going to graph data is that firstly, rates can be really helpful for comparison. And what I mean by that is like the number of incidents per day as opposed to like the number of incidents generally. So anyone who's working in school settings, the month of December is not comparable to the month of November because the kids are only in school for like 2 weeks of December, whereas they're in for the whole of November. So we need to just bear in mind that we then need to maybe look at, well, what is the number of incidents per day that they're in school? so that then the months become directly comparable. You can program Excel for live graphing. So again, I'm not going to go into that too much, but it's a really quick and easy win around like how do we begin to think about analysing our data really quickly. And then the last bit there is show staff that you're actually using that information. So have regular meetings, update them, post information around like, you know, this is fabulous, you're showing that the behaviour is decreasing, well done on implementing interventions, all of those sorts of things, so that actually we're reinforcing staff for completing information. So keyword number 2 is collection. Okay, and then our last step is actually using that information to then make data-informed decisions. So the question that we should always think about is like, is the graph indicating that my intervention is working? And this is important because if we don't know whether we need to keep following the plan or we need to consider updating and changing the plan. So if you have a graph that looks like this, where you've got a relatively stable high baseline and then post-intervention it's beginning to decrease, we go, okay, yep, grand, our intervention is working. There's lots of different examples of interventions that are not working. So if you've got sort of like a middle trend like this and then post-intervention it looks exactly the same, there's something not working there. If you've got an increasing trend going across both, not working there. So we begin to think like, actually, we really need to think about doing something differently. And so the first thing that I would always look at is, okay, if it's not working, is the plan actually being followed? And if the plan is being followed, then we need to think about, okay, well, is the plan right? We probably need to change it because that's going to be a bit of an issue. If the plan's being followed, but the behaviour isn't changing, our plan is probably not the right thing. If our interventions and if the behaviour is not reducing and the plan isn't being followed, then we need to ask some further questions. So is the plan actually the right plan? Do I need to change that? Is the plan easy to follow? Do the staff have the right resources? All of those sorts of questions I ask myself. So seeing that staff are not following a plan doesn't automatically mean like, do you know what, staff, you're being a little bit rubbish here, you're not following my plan and my plan's amazing. It's then looking at, well, that contextual fit stuff. Is this the right plan for this context? Sometimes stripping the behaviour support plan back, really back to basics, is the right way to go. Again, I'm sure that all of you will have seen at some point like a really convoluted plan, like so many different strategies that people don't really know what to do. Technically, in PBS ways, it might be beautiful, but it's not implementatable, if that's a word. So we need to then consider like, you're much better off putting in one strategy and putting it in really, really well. That might then make a difference. Put in another strategy once that's done, if you haven't got enough of a difference, put that in really, really well, and then build on that. It's much better to start off small, be successful, and then build upon that. That's also another one of my key settings, is start small, be successful. Because if staff then are successful and you can praise them, you're much more likely to then get them to follow the next step. If we're constantly like beating them around the head with the fact that you didn't follow my absolutely amazing plan, do you know what? They're going to still not follow your absolutely amazing plan. So consider, what can we as the PBS people change in the plan, rather than what do you as a staff member need to do better? And that what we can change in the plan, it might be the actual plan, it might be the environment. And here I look at the sort of like environment in terms of, are there clear prompts to follow the plan? Have I trained them in the plan? And by training, they mentioned before the Eddie model. So that's sort of like, can people explain it? Can they then show you what to do? So that idea that I'm not just asking people to tell me, I'm asking people to show me what to do, that role play and then coaching in situ. If we don't have that, if people can just tell me what they're meant to do, it doesn't mean that they can actually do it. And then, am I reinforcing staff for following the plan? Is the manager reinforcing the staff for following the plan? So making sure that there's lots of things in the environment that makes it much more likely that the plan is going to be followed.
So you've got about 15 minutes left.
Okay, well that's cool because we're on the last slide, so we're going to have opportunities for questions, which is good. So the sort of take-home points from this that I think are really important is that firstly, to make good data-informed decisions, you need to start off from a place of good planning. Don't just whack in a load of behaviour data collection system and think, hopefully I'm going to get the right data, or at some point I might need this. So, you know, sometimes we put in all sorts of weird and wonderful things and then go, actually, I didn't need to know this person's bowel monitoring chart. So make sure that you plan right from the word go. Consider the context. So consider the context of the data systems that you're putting in place. If a service has a lot of agency, make sure that you're taking that into account when you're designing your sort of data collection systems. Make sure that you take account of the context in terms of like, where are the forms going to be placed? Where is it safe for them to be completed? Do staff actually have time to fill out paperwork at the end of their shift and things like that? Make the form really, really super easy. I've said that a few times. Make sure that they're kept in the same place, that there's plenty of them, that there's a pen, that there's a nice, easy checklist to do. And if you think back to that, like, do I need to use like a scatter plot, ABC forms, checklist ABC forms? Can I use other things? Stopwatches, photographs. Get creative with the sort of data that you collect. And then use it, review it, use it, review it, and keep repeating that to make sure that the data is what you're actually wanting to collect. Making sure that it's useful information, because there's no point getting to the end, being ready to go like, yep, I've implemented something, and then it's like, oh, damn, I really wish that I collected data on this. So keep reviewing it and don't get worried about changing your data collection system if it's not actually working.